right, now we're ready to take a quick look at data collection for most to least prompting. So I want to show you this data sheet. This is just one example of a data sheet that you might use when you're collecting data on a student's performance when using the most to least prompting system. And if this were the data sheet that you were using, you'd want to make sure that you note the level of prompting that was used. And again, that would be the student's controlling prompt, because that's going to let you know for either all of these discrete skills or for all of the steps in this chain task, the student we use this specific prompting level for instruction. You're also going to make sure that you collect data on the student's responses, and we're always collecting that in real time so we don't forget how the student did on a specific step. And in this case, you might use a plus sign to indicate a correct response, a minus sign to indicate an incorrect response, and then a 0 if the student did not give any response at all. You're also going to include the number of correct responses. So you would just add these up. What were the number of correct responses? And then finally, the percentage correct. Again, this is one example of a data sheet you might use when collecting data on a skill with which you're using most to least prompts. Here's another one. The first data sheet that I showed you would be a data sheet that you would use for only one session or one lesson. However, a benefit of this one is that this data sheet can be used across multiple sessions. And it's a little bit easier, or a lot easier to me, to see a student's progress when using this type of data sheet. Because when you're looking at the other data sheet, you are only seeing one session, the results of one session. So if we look at this data sheet, we can see that in baseline, the student was at 0%, either with errors or no responses across 3 data sessions. Then the teacher moved into her instructional trials, and in those instructional trials, you can see that the most intrusive, when using most to least prompting, that the controlling prompt was a model. And so when the teacher implemented and provided the student with a model prompt, the student met criteria, or I'm assuming this is criteria, although it could also be that they predetermined that they were looking at the number of days. But the student was at 100% for 3 consecutive sessions. Again, that might be what mastery criteria was set at, or the teacher could have predetermined that we're going to use a model prompt for 3 days before trying to fade. Now, I want you to note the change in the prompting level once the student met mastery. So this would be mastery here. And then once the student met mastery, you can see that the teacher faded to a gestural prompt. So we always want to be very mindful of our students' performance and when they've either met the predetermined number of days with a specific prompt, or when they've met the mastery criteria that we set, that we then begin our fading, and that we do that on schedule or based on mastery. Here's another example. And again, you can see that the student in baseline was at 0%. The first prompt that was used, the first controlling prompt, was a full physical prompt. The student was at 100%. The teacher then moved to a model. The student was again at 100%. In both of those cases was across 2 consecutive sessions. The teacher then moved to a verbal prompt, again at 100% across 2 consecutive sessions. And then the student moved to independence. Now, again, it's hard for us to tell because the student was at 100% mastery, whether or not the fading schedule was based on the mastery criteria, or if it was 2 days with full physical, 2 days with model, and 2 days with verbal. But you're always, again, going to predetermine that before you begin instruction. And so again, looking at the fading, the teacher moved from full physical assistance to a model, to verbal, and then to independence. Here's an example of what graphing might look like. And one of the things I want to make sure that I note is that the teacher indicated not only the week, so that this is a case in which they were fading based on the week. So we're going to do 3 sessions in week 1, 3 sessions in week 2, 3 sessions in week 3, etc. So in baseline, the student was at 0 to 10%, indicating that they did need instruction on that skill. So I want to ask you a question, and you can just write this on your document that you'll turn in for your class participation. What was the controlling prompt that was used in week 1? What about in week 2? and then finally in week 3. So again, as you can see that fading from the most intrusive prompt to the least intrusive prompt in that student's prompting hierarchy. But then we have this weird data point that's out here. And I want you just to stop and see if you can figure out, or maybe you know, what is the data point that's an outlier? And you can just make a note of that on your document. All right, so when we're looking at that data point, it's a little weird, right? Why is it way out across from everything else? Well, in all likelihood, that's a maintenance data point. So the teacher did a maintenance probe to see, is the student maintaining the skill? And so she taught the skill. The student was at Independence for 3 days. And then we don't know if these are the actual days, like it's January 15th, or the days are the number of sessions. So it would be on day 13, day 14 of the instructional session. But it's most likely that this is a maintenance probe. So once the student met independence, then the teacher gave some time in which she did not engage in instruction and then came back to see, where is the student performing? Is the student maintaining the skill? And this is a beautiful data point because the student is maintaining the skill and maintaining the skill at 100% independently. All right, that was a real quick one. Just do a quick check-in with yourself, make note of any questions that you have, and if you do have any questions, make sure you bring them to class. All right, I'll see you in the next one on Graduated Guidance.